What's up everyone, this is John with Skate Better, and today we are doing the Passport deck review. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you all so much for sticking by the channel. I will have more reviews coming soon, and I'm pretty excited to share what I got coming up. So first things first, why did I choose this deck? I chose Passport because I think they're the same distribution company that does the weekend decks, and I really like that deck. I think it's Paul Schmidt, Schmidt Sticks or whatever it's called, like his PS Sticks factory is where they come from. Someone in the comments can correct me if I'm wrong. But anyways, I really like their riders. I think they have a really sick team. Jack O'Brady's like one of my favorite skaters. Whatever he's doing is nuts. So I wanted to give him a try, and I had the Ventures at the time, which were an 8.25 truck, and this was an 8.25. So I wanted to pick it up and test it out, and I'm glad that I did. So next thing, measurements for this deck. This deck is an 8.25 in width by 31.875 length, and then has a wheelbase of 14.25. But that's pretty standard for an 8.25 deck. Usually I skate 8.3 and 8.5, so I was expecting this to be a little bit shorter. The wheelbase I wasn't surprised at as well. Last thing I'll mention about the shape and size is, although it is a little bit shorter than some of the decks I'm used to skating, it's not by that much, and it really didn't feel super compact, even though it's sort of set up that way. And I think it might be because there's like a decent amount of flat between the bolts here and where the nose starts, and then also a little bit in the tail as well. So I think that just made the deck feel a little bit longer than maybe it normally would. For the concave and pitch of this deck, it's really average. I would say the pitch is probably right dab in the middle. I give it a 6 on a scale of 1 to 10, so just angle of nose and tail. And then for the concave, I'd also give it probably a solid 6. It's not really a particularly flat deck, but it really doesn't have like a good amount of concave either. Really reminded me of the Polar deck actually. This deck right here, if I put it on top, it's almost exactly the same. However, I want to show you two other decks so it's a little bit more of a comparison. So this is the Plan B deck. It's one of the flattest, least concave decks that I have. And when you put that on top, you can clearly see the difference in concave, right? Hopefully y'all can see that. This is a lot more straighter going across. The Plan B's on top. And then the Passport deck on the bottom definitely has a little bit more of a concave. The pitch is pretty similar. I'd say the Plan B is a little bit flatter in the pitch as well. So just showing you an extreme example for comparison of a really flat deck versus this Passport. And then we have this primitive deck that is very similar. It's an 838, but it's very similar in wheelbase, shape, and concave. And I would say the primitive has the tiniest bit more concave, although it's kind of hard to see because the dips are happening at slightly different points. But I gave, I think, the primitive like a 6.57 concave, so it's very similar to like a primitive shape, but maybe just a little bit less concave. For the nose and tail shape of this deck, it was also average, definitely more on the popsicle-y side, but almost slight taper going on in the nose. And then I'd say the tail is actually pretty average. For comparison, we got the primitive, so you can see both of these noses here and how they stack up. And the primitive, it is an 838. I would say they're both very similar popsicle shape. Maybe the slightest edge goes to the primitive. I think it's just a little bit fatter, and the nose is a little bit shorter. And then here, so you can see the tails as well. So the tail on the primitive is also a little bit more round, a little bit fuller, and the Passport has a slight bit more of a taper. Not as much as that Death Wish that I was skating, but it's a little bit less full than like a true full popsicle, and it's definitely not a shovel nose or tail as well. Overall, nose and tail shape, it's pretty average. Don't expect it to be super full, but don't expect it to be like a tapered nose either. It's pretty much like right in the middle. Personally, I find more decks nowadays have been more popsicle shaped and have a little bit more of a fuller nose and tail. So know that like this is not quite that, but it's not quite like a classic popsicle. It's like somewhere in between two. A little bit more on the fuller side, definitely not as much in the tail. So here's where things get interesting. We talk about the durability and the pop of this deck. Overall, the durability was great. I don't have too many chips. I got like a little ding going in here, but that was like, I remember when that happened and it was a really bad zip out. So that's to be expected. Overall though, the deck durability wise, I'd give it like a solid 8 out of 10. For an 8.25, this deck did feel like it had a really good amount of durability in it. However, the pop was not super snappy. Some decks I get and like I'll snap some ollies and it really feels like it's got like a little extra spring in the wood or something. Like the weekend deck had that. I was expecting this deck to have the same kind of experience. And for whatever reason, it didn't feel that way. The Enjoy deck kind of had that springy thing going on as well as the Zero deck. So I was a little surprised to find that it didn't quite feel the same way. It felt really stiff, which is something I'll talk about in pros and cons. Durability was fine, but pop, I'd give the pop like a solid 7.5. The thing with this deck though, is a lot of decks I have, the pop sort of wears off, right? Like this Almost deck, it was really strong, started to wear away. But this deck did not seem to lose its pop. So it was pretty much consistent pop the whole time. So I gave the pop like 7.5 out of 10, but it maintained that 7.5 pretty much the whole time I was skating it. And then durability, I'm gonna give it a solid 8, because once again, I think for an 825, it's a pretty durable deck. So last thing, general pros and cons of this deck. There's two things that I wanna mention. The first is it is a stiff feeling deck. So if we're used to like the primitive deck had like a lot of like flex in it when you're setting up for tricks, putting your feet down to pressure to do whatever, this deck feels very, very stiff. So if you like that kind of stiff, consistent feeling deck, this might be good. If you prefer a deck that has a little bit more flex in it or like kind of breaks in, this is not gonna be a deck that I think you'd enjoy. And the last thing I wanna mention is this deck has a decent amount of flat between the front two bolts and the nose, and then also a little bit in the back and the tail that I'm used to. For me, that did make the deck feel a little bit longer, and it was weird. Like I actually prefer, I think, a little bit less space in the tail, so I don't have to feel like the pockets feels weird for me when I have too much space, and then less space in the nose so that my flick can be a little bit faster and quicker. So that's what I like. This deck did not have that. It definitely had more space for the nose, a little bit more for the tail, so although it was a shorter shape, it just didn't work the way that I really wanted it to. But some people might really prefer that. So if you like a little bit more space here, I think the Plan B was a good version of that too. It has a lot of space for the nose. You might really like this deck. But I'll leave my general thoughts there and I'll let you all decide if you enjoy in the future. That's pretty much it. I hope you did enjoy this review. Thanks again so much for sticking with the channel. I do have some other reviews coming up. I still have the Bronson G3 bearings, the traditional standard ones I need to do a review on. I have the Spitfire OG classic shape wheel I'm gonna do a review on. And then I just have the Etnies Windrow Volk shoe that I'll also be doing a review on soon. That's all coming. Thanks for bearing with me. I appreciate y'all. If you did like this video, please like, subscribe, and comment. I'll see you next time. Take care.